Grants Specialist, who helps out with the Farmers Market Local Food Promotion Program. And been with USDA for about 6 months, so still relatively new, figuring things out. Recently introduced to a local catch network as well, and attended an event called about 2 weeks ago. And essentially I volunteered to help out with this office hour because I think it's a good experience, hopefully for you all and for me as well, as one of the first technical assistance exchanges I've had with future potential applicants for these programs. So anyways, looking forward to speaking with you all and answering questions where I can. And if I don't have the answer off the top of my head for this too, you know, taking detailed notes and getting you the information you need.
Thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, curious, anybody have any dire questions in regard to USDA grants, specifically FMLFPP grants?
Hi, Jeremy. This is Sarah, and I'm going to ask the question that I think a lot of us in Alaska without very many resources wonder, and it's just, you know, I've asked a few different times and gotten the same answer, but I still don't quite understand it as far as what equipment can be bought under the LFPP versus leased when there's not something in the area to lease. You know, like say a freezer, you know, a lot of it is, you know, the 3-year lease terms, but I guess I did find out that if we were to lease something, possibly the shipping up to here could be covered, but is there any sort of exception when it just doesn't make sense to go with a lease where buying would be a better option?
So unfortunately, I don't know of any exceptions to that. So yeah, I think as you spoke in general for the LFPP grant, general purpose equipment, it must be leased and not bought. But I definitely hear your concern here. We have had internal discussions too with our management to convey these concerns, not just with potential applicants, but also with current grantees who have expressed concerns about the price of leasing this general purpose equipment being whether or not being available for lease, and also where economically where it just doesn't make sense, where it would be more beneficial to purchase and then, you know, retain or dispose of the equipment at the end of the life cycle or at the end of the grant, as opposed to leasing it. So yeah, what you've heard from other GMS is right, that currently there are no exceptions for that. But you know, we're working to, you know, try to make it workable for grantees, obviously, because if the options don't exist, you know, there's got to be a workable solution there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy, are there limits to the type of nonprofit that can apply? Does it have to be 501c6 or 3?
No, it does not. So in the RFA, there's a list of eligible applicants, and it's very broad of who can apply. What's really important is that the proposed project doesn't benefit just one organization or entity, that there's benefits to the overall regional food system, like to multiple entities, to multiple producers.
So Jeremy, just to clarify, the applicant does not have to be a nonprofit?
So let me just pull up. No, it doesn't have to be a nonprofit. So on the RFA, on both of them, the RFA for both the FMPP and the LFPP, it has a list of eligible entities. Yeah, section 3 of the RFA. So it starts on page 10 and it just provides a chart of which entities are eligible. But it's very broad. They have, let's see, 10 different types of entities that are eligible to apply for these grant programs. Dropping the doc in the chat. Yeah, I can drop the link for both of those. Hang on one sec.
Jeremy, we also have, I'm going to drop a link as well. We have a resources page where some of that information is consolidated into one web page.
Oh,
So
okay.
it'll be like a easy one glance kind of thing. But yeah, I think always referencing the RFA would be the best way to go. Anyone else thinking about pressing questions that they have?
Hi, thanks so much for having this information session. So I don't think that my organization will have the capacity to apply for this fiscal year, but I was curious if these funding opportunities are yearly and yeah, what that looks like.
Yes, so around March, I want to say mid-March or so, maybe early April, I forget the exact timing of it. There are annual opportunities to apply for the FMLFPP grants. What changes year to year, especially last year compared to this year, is the level of funding. Last year, there was significantly more funding with like a big funding infusion from the American Rescue Plan and COVID funds. So that level came down for this fiscal year, but yeah, every year there's an opportunity to apply.
Thank you.
You bet.
And Jeremy, maybe it would be helpful if you have knowledge about applying and also like ease people's minds. If they apply one year, like does that increase their chances or like decrease their chances in getting funding following years that they weren't able to receive funding in like that first year that they apply? I don't know if you can speak to that at all, but I think that's a question that comes up a lot of people saying like, I'm not quite ready to apply, but I want to turn in an application to get feedback about my application. Like, will that hurt my chances in future years? Like if it's not like a really strong, if I don't feel like very strongly about the application. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that.
So no, your results in one fiscal year for the application, they don't affect what happens next year. So each review process is done individually per year, or for that application period. So if you were not selected for 1 year, it wouldn't affect in any ways future applications. And one thing to note too, as part of the review process, both successful and unsuccessful applicants are emailed the comments and their evaluation results so they can see how their application scored to give you feedback for future applications.
And Jeremy, understanding, of course, the grants are based on the merit of the proposal, but is putting in a smaller grant financial amount request, does that give you better odds? Like, do you go big or go home, or do you just go for something smaller thinking that maybe that would be more likely to get funded?
No, that has no relevance. Really, the only criteria are the ones that are described in the RFA. So I know that's towards the end, but there's 5 different evaluation criteria like technical merit. I don't think I can name them off the top of my head.
Okay.
But yeah, there's 5 criteria there. Oh, here it is. So alignment and intent, technical merit, achievability, expertise and partners, and fiscal plan and resources. So once this opportunity closes and all applications are received, they go through a merit review process, and a panel of reviewers will assess points based on these 5 criteria, and the highest ranking applications then are move forward for selection. And it really has nothing to do with how little or how much you're requesting.
Okay, thank you.
Jeremy, this is Barbara. I'm looking at the sort of compilation of all the information, which is extremely helpful. I appreciate that. These RFAs, there's 3 actually that are due May 16th.
Yeah.
Are these pre-proposals or full-on proposals?
Full-on proposals.
Okay.
So yeah, so best case scenario, like this meeting here is a meeting to address like questions for prospective grantees who are like in the midst of already creating that application, and have taken the steps to register with SAM, set their account at grants.gov and be ready to submit. But yeah, so this is for the May 16th deadline is for the full proposal to be submitted into grants.gov.
Did we miss a pre-proposal for those, or is there no pre-proposal requirement?
No pre-proposal, it's just the application grants.gov.
So Jeremy, just a little bit of context, and Barbara, maybe you could speak to this, but there's a grant program that's really pretty big in the seafood space. It's called an SK grant. And there's a pre-proposal period where people submit their pre-proposal materials. And I think once those are accepted, if they are accepted, then they're invited to submit a full proposal. And I don't know,
Okay.
so that I think, is pretty common with those grants. So Jeremy, like maybe you can speak to what's the typical application period that once you've announced the grants being open to closing, like what is the average amount of time that people have like once for the application period?
So I believe this particular opportunity, it was published on March 1st, and it closes May 16th. So we're allowing 75 days. I think in the past it's been a little shorter. I want to say 60 days, but we've added a little extra time. USDA, we encourage, after the publication of the RFA, we encourage prospective applicants to start working. Just the whole process of getting registered, to get a unique identifier and on SAM.gov and grants.gov, like that process can take a little while, as well as obviously the process of drafting the whole project narrative, getting the letters of commitment, letters of support for match, which are required for the FMLFPP projects. So really, I would say, when the RFA is published, take the time to read through it. Obviously, for folks who haven't done this, but I guess this is advice for next time around, since this occurs every year. If you are just starting, or if you have the time and you want to put together something, if this sounds like something you can do in the next 2 weeks and you haven't started, by all means, go for it. But I guess best case scenario, from the time the RFA is published, take the time to read it and then start, the process of drafting the project narrative, getting those letters of support, and getting everything, grants.gov, SAM.gov, everything registered. I would say have everything done at least a few days before the deadline for closing. So that way, if there are any hiccups with submitting on grants.gov, that you can work those technical issues out and, and miss the deadline just because of a technicality there, if that makes sense.
Has anyone that's on the call right now applied for USDA grant funding in the past? Tanya, do you want to speak of your experience a little bit more?
Sure. So I work for an organization called Farm to Institution New England. We're a nonprofit based in New England. I'm in Massachusetts, and we're a fiscally sponsored organization, which adds kind of another level of complication for us. If you don't know what that is, that's an organization that we're small enough that we don't run our own sort of financial and HR department. There is another nonprofit that offers that as a service, and we pay a fee out of our fundraising efforts towards them for that service. So, and they are the ones who negotiate the indirect fee, the federal level indirect fee, and who actually do the submission for us, have the what's the new name for the DUNS number, Jeremy?
The UIN, unique identifier, unique entity, the UEI, I think. Unique identity identifier.
Yes. So that identifier number.
Yes, identifier number, when we call it that.
Yeah, so we have a whole process of just sort of like getting in the door with that, but we do have that number already, which is like, I'm sure you've heard this a lot of times. Even if you feel like you're coming into this too late right now to really adequately kind of pull off an application, there's no reason not to go ahead and start the process of applying for that number, because you could use it not just for the next time these grants are up, but other federal grants. And it's really helpful to have that just sort of taken care of and have that step out of the way. And it's not like there's any major, it's just a process. There's not like there's any real cost to you for doing that. And so we're in the process right now of applying for a regional food system partnership grant. And I think right around the time that it was announced, we kind of knew it was coming. We've been paying attention to that and have had a number of ideas over time, and then really just spent some time internally thinking about it, then reaching out to the people that we would want, that we, want to be in this partnership with, because we have, as a network organization, we have lots of those going on. So trying to figure out what made the most sense right now. Right now we're just a couple of weeks away. We have our narrative drafted. We're still working on our work plan and we're still working on the budget associated with the work plan, but we have it pretty well sketched out. We have everybody with a timeline so far. We've had several meetings with our partners to work out the details, and we have 2 more coming up to kind of make sure that we get everything squared away. And I think this grant is particularly challenging because the partnership grants often involve a lot of people, a lot of organizations. So just trying to, and the match component is no joke either. 25% match for an up to $1 million grant is a lot of money to think about. So it was also squaring that away with our budget as well, and starting to have those conversations early on. You don't want the money side of things to trip you up. So as you are developing your ideas, whether it's for a partnership grant or if it's for an LFPP, there are still other people involved. Being really clear about what the expectations are with everybody going in is a huge part of that. So getting that on board right away is pretty useful. Those would be like some of, I would sort of say, like a good headliner of our approach. And not just, so we've done this before, I would be very similar. It's just so easy to talk about the one that we're in the middle of, I guess. And we have gotten some grants and we haven't gotten others. So also, as Jeremy said, taking on that feedback, it's a really good thing to try to do, even if you can't totally pull it off, or if you get it in but don't get it, because you do learn a lot from going through the process. So I can't stress enough how I think useful it is to give it a go, because the funding continues to pop up in different opportunities. And once you sort of get the hang of going for federal grants, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that idea, like a lot of the information that's pertinent to a good application is just data about the needs of your community for these types of projects. And there's a lot of overlap there. So if you go through that process of gathering a lot of data and meeting with partners who have the same vision to improve regional food systems, not only will that help your partnership, but it will also be something that in the event you weren't funded for a FMLFPP grant, that information will be useful in other future grant applications.
Definitely. And I think Stephen will speak to that a little bit later. But yeah, that has me thinking, thank you so much for sharing your experience. But as Jeremy mentioned, typically and hopefully this will be annual funding. And so you can start thinking about your project idea. And even if you don't apply for this year, like having a full year to be thinking about it before the application opens is really helpful, because it is a bit of a heavy lift. They'll ask you very specific questions about like, what are your objectives? What are your outcomes? That data related information, working out a budget, understanding like who's going to be a part of your project. And the more time you have before the application's open to figure out, the more comfortable and like calm you're going to be going into the application process, instead of feeling like I have to bring together all of these people in a couple of months. You know, you'll be able to do some of that legwork ahead of time. So think about that. If this year's not the year for you, there are always future years, but it's never too early to start. And from my experience, the RFAs don't change that much. They're usually pretty similar. And so they'll be asking a lot of the same questions. And so it'll give you a good template for what to work off of in future years. And then another plug is USDA is also looking for reviewers. Jeremy, did that close already? Did that deadline pass?
I believe it just closed. Yes.
Oh, dang it. Well, in future years, you can apply to become a peer reviewer, and that will give you some insight of how these projects are reviewed and what reviewers are thinking about when looking at the project. So something to consider in future years.
Yeah, with the caveat, I saw you put the link in the chat. You're welcome to try that link and see if it's still open to apply. I know we were having trouble getting enough peer reviewers, so they might have extended the period of time that we were accepting applications for peer reviewers. So it's worth a shot if that's something that interests any of you.
Jordan, can I say one more thing? I just want to make sure that I didn't like intimidate anybody by talking about where we were in our process and all the things we've done so far, because the regional food systems partnership ones, I think, especially the way we're approaching ours, is it does take a fair amount of legwork to work out the elements with the partners. But some of the other grants, like an LFPP, can actually be a lot more like linear is the way I think of it. So if you have some supply chain partners you already have strong relationships with, and you've been daydreaming about the thing that's gonna like solve some obstacle you have, you may already have most of what you need to work on that grant. So don't feel like, oh, forget it, I'm too far behind the 8 ball already. There's still some opportunity there. And it's just a matter of like being familiar with what those opportunities are, doing a little bit of looking into that and figuring out what you have in terms of resources already.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. In addition to like USDA wants to see where you are. They want to see like how far you've come. They want to know that you have the supports in place in order to carry through your project. And so don't feel like you need to like bring in all of these new partners. Like lean on your existing support structure that you have in place to really be able to, again, like prove that like you can carry through this project and you have strong relationships and people that will help you do that.
And
Jenna, did I? Sarah.
in having letters of support, what's the right number of letters of support? Should you really be trying to get several, or just demonstrating just a handful shows that the need is there?
I really think with the letters of commitment, support, what's important is just having ones that are really relevant to what the goal of the proposal is. I don't think there's like a set number, but it should be enough partners to be able to to execute whatever goals you have in that proposal.
So Jeremy, like on the order of 3 or 30 letters of support?
Probably much closer to 3. Like, most proposals I've seen, like I said, I've had a limited opportunity to review these grants because I've been with USDA for 6 months. But what I've seen, it's typically, I don't know, 3 to 7 maybe, just ballpark. But as long as it makes sense and the partners that are committed to the project really support all aspects of the project, then the number is really ancillary to the proposal.
I think we'll have about a few more questions, time for questions for Jeremy. So if you have any, please unmute yourself and ask. And then, so maybe we'll have 5 more minutes for questions, and then we'll transition to have Stephen share some information with us.
Hi, Jeremy. This is Jana. I'm based in Hawaii, and this is our first time applying for the USDA Local Food Promotion Program. I'm curious, I didn't see in the RFA when applicants would hear back from the USDA. I know that if we're awarded, the projects would start September 30th of this year. Didn't give a specific timeline of when folks would get a yes or no feedback, or maybe I missed it.
Sure, I don't think that the RFA provides like a specific date, but both successful and unsuccessful applicants would be notified after the review process concludes. Typically that takes a few months. So I would expect, all applicants to be notified in the September timeframe. That's about the best date I could give. I think the RFA, it has general language there too. It says just a few months, that'll take a few months, but that applicants are notified in writing of the results.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I guess another quick question. So we're looking at applying for the implementation grants. And I know that there's very specific language or activities between the planning grants and the implementation. And I'm just curious, are there specific activities that would be like not good to have in implementation grants? Like, for example, if we're going to be doing value-added product development for a few species, but we also include some desktop analysis and research in the implementation grant, would that be like not good to have? Because it's more to a planning grant.
Well, I think if it complements the goals for implementing, like if it LFPP, if it increases local and regional food consumption, it strengthens the regional food system. If it's an activity that does that, I don't see a problem with putting it in the proposal.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if we couldn't have any of that activity in the implementation grant. And it would just be a small portion, so.
Yeah, I don't think that would be an issue.
Okay.
If it supports what you ultimately want to do. I know in the RFAs it has unallowable activities, so really that's the hard and fast list of things that aren't allowed. But if it's an activity that complements what you're trying to do for the grant and it's not explicitly on those list of unallowable activities, I'd say, go for it.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
But
Jeremy,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Is there time for one more question?
Yes.
I was just going to say,
We can do a couple.
okay, Jeremy, I just wanted to apologize. I was late. I was looking forward to hearing you speak. So I'll be watching the recording later. But just a general question, I guess, about a grant that you've seen. If you have any examples of grants that you've seen that just like really checked all the boxes for you, or like projects that you've been a part of that you think just really did a good job, and kind of that difference between having a good application and what are those unique things that maybe tipped it over into a great application?
sure. I can't speak of like a specific example, but what I can say is the RFA does a good job of spelling out like what the criteria is to use to evaluate the application. So, so several key things that reviewers are going to look at. They want to look at, obviously just the technical proposal, what you plan to do, if it makes sense, if it will, improve the regional food systems. They'll look to make sure that you explain data behind what you want to do, explain the need for this project. Another priority area for AMS right now is the low income, low food access zones. So if you have a project that focuses on helping those areas, then that's another thing that could help. They want to make sure you have the critical infrastructure in place. So that's defined in the RFA. So, for example, if it's a LFPP project that you have like food hub or distribution center or whatever it may be to support the project beforehand, that's in place, ready to go. Then, the other required components, the letters of commitment, for those, I would recommend having those individualized to really reflect what the partner will do to support the project, not having, boilerplate language and just having partners sign off, but actually tailor that to what they will do for the project. Then, match letters, this is something we'll look at. So each partner that contributes a match, they're required to submit a match letter detailing, and the templates for both the letters of commitment and for match letters are in the RFA. So you don't have to create those from scratch. You can download the templates and share those with partners who would collaborate on the LFPP projects. Lastly, the only other thing I want to mention is, and I'll put the link in the chat, USDA publishes the executive summaries for past LFPP and MFPP projects that we funded. So I'd encourage you to look through those as well, just to see which projects have been funded in the past, and that'll give you an idea of potentially what USDA is looking for and may fund in the future.
That's a great question. Thanks, Stephen. And Sarah, I saw you unmuted. I just want to see if you had a question as well.
Just a quick question on the matching funds. At what point do you demonstrate that you have that available?
So for the matching funds, that's part of the application. So you want to have all those matches, all those commitments for matches ready to go when you submit the application.
Was there a time, Jeremy, this makes me wonder, so when you're putting in your application, you have to have the match letters. So that is like the commitment piece. Like at what point are you reporting on those matches? Is there like, yeah, what is the process for the follow-up, I guess, of ensuring that those matches are still what the original application said they were going to be?
Sure, yeah, so for successful grantees, the way it works is when they submit payment requests for reimbursement payments, they also send information about how much match has been provided on what's called the SF 270 form, the standard form where a grantee reports not only how many federal funds they've drawn down or are requesting for reimbursement, but also reports how the amount of match for that project. And then periodically, at least here at USDA, we will ask, we'll conduct desk audits where we'll look at supporting documentation for match to make sure that, you know, a grantee is actually, that the project is actually supported by matching funds and that the grantee can prove that through documentation that those funds were spent on the project. Is that what you're getting at, Julie?
Yeah, just to understand like what will be asked of awarded grantees and when, just to, yeah, I think it's just good to know like what happens after you get the grant, right? Like I think sometimes it's hard to know. Sure. And so yeah, thank you for answering that.
I saw, Tanya, you got a question here. Yes, they should submit 2 separate letters. So really for matching funds, for matching funds that come from, say you have 3 organizations that are going to provide matching funds, there should be 3 separate letters. So 1 letter per organization for match funds.
But then if they're also doing, so if they're also a partner in the actual work, so if they have a role to play in deliverables, do they then also do a letter of commitment? So separate from the letter of match, or can they combine the 2 into one that talks about what activities they'll do as well as what match they're providing?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't see why not. I mean, there is some overlap on those types of letters. I would recommend just, you know, being clear, you know, spell it out for whoever's going to be reviewing it, the title that it's both a letter of commitment and a letter of match. But I don't see why not, because there is overlap. You know, obviously if you're matching funds, you're committed to the project. And I know the big difference with the matching letters is they have, what do you call it? Like just a template box of where you can put the amount, where you can put the, what's it called? Like a word table, I guess, where you can put like the match activity and then have the amount, dollar amount. So that's the one of the big differences between the commitment letter and the match letters. Yeah, I won't belabor the point, but I don't see why you couldn't combine the 2.
Wonderful. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the call today and fielding these questions, and everyone for sharing questions as well.
One other thing too, I can drop in the chat the FMLFPP email box. So if you have any other questions that come to mind, feel free to email it to us, and either myself or another GMS with USDA will get back to you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Jeremy. And yeah, you guys are pretty on top of that. So if there are technical questions about the grant, that's probably the place you want to go to. And then Tanya, so Local Catch received a FMPP grant in 2021. And I'll go back and look to see like our matching letters and our partner letters, because we have, yeah, that match and partner kind of overlapped, and maybe to give you just some feedback about what we did with that.
I think we've combined it in the past too, but I thought it might be worth just making sure that there isn't any problem with that. I don't think we got any feedback about that I recall, but I'd have to double check too.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy. You're welcome to stay on for the second half or hop off if you have to. Yeah, just really appreciate your time and thinking about seafood, and yeah, just again, fielding the questions that people have and getting people more aware and prepared to apply for USDA funding. So yeah, just thankful for your time with us today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks everyone for bearing with me. This is the first time I've done this, so it's a great experience for me, and hopefully this will help me in the future as well. So appreciate it.
You did awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
So now we're going to transition a little bit, and we'll go from maybe like more in the weeds questions to like higher level thinking about grant strategies, and again, creating this roadmap of like, where do I even begin when I'm thinking about grant funding? And today we have Stephen with us. Stephen is the owner and founder of Stewards Unlimited. And I'm going to pass it over to Stephen to introduce yourself and then kick us off with your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan. And I'm really excited to be here today, and wanted to thank you for facilitating this meeting. I think I've been so impressed with everything I've been seeing coming out of the Local Catch Network. And I think you guys provide a great service. So just thank you for doing this and for making the service available to so many people. I can go ahead and share my screen. I have a simple presentation about purposeful storytelling through grant writing. And to be honest, I have prepared this for a lot of people who may not have applied for grants before. So it seems like we've got some experience in the room. You know, maybe some of this isn't as relevant, but I figured we could start with more general information, and then at the end we can talk about some specifics. But I think a common problem I see is trying to start out with too many details when it comes to writing your story. So I just wanted to say that I primarily have worked in the past with producers, so farmers. Working within seafood is a newer venture for me, but I always try to look up a quote that has like the idea of stewardship in it. And I think that I've really been enjoying exploring seafood a little bit more recently, because there are a lot of these same values that are present with small farmers as well. So feeding into your local food economies and really building the sense of community, doing things not to maximize profit, but to maximize, the environmental benefit, the social benefit of your communities. And I just want to say that I think that the work that these smaller scale systems do is incredibly important, and I'm glad that there are funding opportunities available. So I want to start out and just say that this is probably one of the most relevant pieces of advice for first-time grant writers. And it's that you should do your grant narrative last. This is something that I've just seen over time with a lot of people who haven't done it as many times. And I'll kind of walk you through it. This is generally my process that I'll go through with a client. Everybody wants to start with the grant narrative because it's like a rallying document, but I find that you end up losing a lot of your energy and kind of getting lost in the weeds if you don't have a roadmap first. So in my process, this is what I'll usually go through with people. You don't have to read it all, but basically doing like eligibility things, then making sure that we have a good understanding of what they've done in the past, understanding the big picture view through a scope of work and a budget, engaging other partners and third parties, getting the ball rolling with getting letters of support, that kind of thing. And then at step 5, I start to research relevant data and actually complete a narrative or a business plan. And then step 6 is kind of finalizing all of the regulatory things within a grant. But this is the normal process that I'll go through. And I think it underscores the idea that narratives are oftentimes not the things that you should start with. So there's a couple of differences between a narrative and work plan. A narrative is where you're going to be telling the story of your project from the beginning to the end. It's written in oftentimes long form text as paragraphs. You're really getting into some of the details about how things will be done. And you're explaining the need for your project and then the desired impact. So you're saying, this is what's lacking, and then this is what we're doing to address it, and this is what it will lead to. A work plan, on the other hand, is where you outline activities for your project. So usually work plans involve bulleting out very specific objectives and action-oriented tasks. You're looking at this bigger picture of all the work that you need to do, and you're ensuring that anything that's on your work plan actually leads to the project impact that you're claiming. So an example of a work plan is something like this, where I need to create a slide deck for the local catch network presentation on April 28th, 2022. So I write 30 engaging slides, I polish off the look of the presentation, and then I send it to LCN for approval. The second task is that I present the slide deck, and I need to introduce myself and thank Jordan for facilitating, crack a joke that's clever, but not too clever, and then rush through the presentation in order to get to the Q&A. So that's very bulleted as compared to a narrative, which, Stephen will prepare the slides. I'll bore you. I won't read this all, but the idea that I want to draw attention to is this last sentence, that this presentation will allow Stephen to practice his public speaking skills while simultaneously adding value to the grant writing efforts of members of LCN. And so it goes from very specific tasks, and a lot of that content on that previous slide is in this paragraph as well, but it draws a link from those very specific tasks to the results. So it goes a little bit beyond it, right? But I was able to use much of the content that I had already developed. So what are some reasons that you might be wanting to start with or why not start with the narrative? So it's where you explain the details, but details really change in a project. I can't tell you, I'm working on a project right now, and we've been working on it for 2 months, and all of the details have changed within the last week and a half. And so I unfortunately did not follow this approach, which is kind of what inspired me to talk about this so much, that I did not start really nailing down the work plan first. And that's why I ended up writing a narrative that's now needing to be rewritten almost in entirety. So details are going to be changing as you go, and keeping track of what changes you've made and kind of the points that you make are really hard if you have something and then you're editing it, especially as you get into these documents that are 15, 25 pages long. You make a good point somewhere, but then it gets edited and you kind of lose some of those thoughts, but you kind of think they're already in. As your ideas develop, you're also going to be developing potentially stronger stories than you originally realized. So you might be headed out to increase the amount of fish that you can sell in a local market, but then through working with a partner through a program, maybe you start to develop an institutional relationship and you can sell directly to an institution. And then you're not going to need as much content about increasing the demand for the fishermen. That's still going to be a very important part, but you'll want to talk more about how you're building this partnership, right? So then the amount of content in each section will change, and the overall story and focus of your narrative changes as well. So even though you may have had some of those details before, you want to frame it differently based on what the work plan actually ends up being. I think also a lot of people can end up overshooting or undershooting the budget available for a project if you start out with the narrative. It's not always clear all of the expenses involved with any particular activities. And so starting with a work plan is usually grounded in the budget as well. And so you can make sure from the beginning that you understand what your expenses are. It is far easier to build a narrative from a work plan than it is to go the other way. So if you start with a narrative, it's a lot harder to understand and have agreements about what activities you need to do to accomplish the narrative. So if you develop a narrative with a partner and have a bunch of conversations about the narrative, you're going to end up having to have a lot of those same conversations when you develop the work plan later. So it's much more efficient usually to develop the work plan first, because after that, it's very easy to go into a narrative that everybody agrees with, because there are fewer implementation details and it's more just about telling a story. So it's easier for one party to take a work plan and make a narrative after the fact. It's also that actions lead to results, and that's really what your narrative is about. So you can't claim any impact that you don't have action related to it. And so working from a work plan allows you to tangibly see your actions, the activities that are going to be taking place during the grant, and saying, as a result of these actions, this is the impact that we're going to have. And that really is the core of your narrative. So in order to create a work plan, and I would say that this oftentimes is the same as designing your project, thinking about your strategy and approach as it leads to the narrative, is that I'll oftentimes start with very high level objectives of what I want to accomplish. It makes sure that you're really intentional about your long-term goals, and you can draw from the grant goals and objectives in order to make sure that you're accomplishing the things that they prioritize long-term. Oftentimes I'll start out by copy pasting essentially the grant goals, because you want to use the same language that they use in the RFA. So I'll start with those, and it really provides almost like an accountability, because I think a lot of people can say, oh, here's a grant funding and I've always wanted to do this thing, and so I'm going to do this thing and try to get grant funding. But I find it's the people are most successful when they start out saying, this grant wants me to do this thing, starting from a blank slate, how can I accomplish those goals? And you'll find that a lot of the same activities are the same, but just giving yourself that extra buffer where you're not immediately going into what you're accustomed to can usually provide some unique results. And along that line, it really helps you think about other potential partners who want the same outcome. So if you start out with your activities, you're thinking about who does these activities and who can support me, and it really narrows your view. Whereas if you're thinking about outcomes, it provides a lot of opportunities to come up with pretty unique partners who want the same outcome but aren't necessarily associated with what you're doing. So an example would be if with seafood, but education would be an example of doing some kind of unrelated education for youth around the consumption of seafood. They may want the same goals of improving people's understanding of seafood and nutrition. But if you start out with just talking about wanting to increase the amount of seafood sold, you may not ever think about engaging with a school or with a nonprofit that does that kind of work. So from there, starting with the objectives, then you brainstorm the activities. You likely have an idea, like I said, but just keep it loose. I try to put down a lot of things, and I try to encourage people to include activities that they don't already know how to do. So it's easy to say, how can I accomplish this with what I by myself? But I would say trying to think about if this were an ideal situation, what is the ideal path to accomplish this goal? And you'll be identifying gaps that in your current capacity, that one, maybe a grant could help you increase your capacity to include that, or two, it'd be an opportunity to find a partnership with another organization that could provide that service instead of you. So I think in this step, it's really beneficial to not settle too much. I think so many people rush into a project plan and then they get caught up. So I really encourage people to think broadly, go down rabbit holes, see what pops up. The hardest part and most time-consuming part of a grant application usually is nailing down the work plan, scope of work, the budget. The narrative is not what takes the longest if you have those other things. Narrative oftentimes takes longer because people start and then have to like are bouncing between the two over and over, and then you end up redoing things 100 times. So I really encourage people, don't rush into it, take your time, and make sure that you have a good idea that you're really excited about. So from there, I'll take the 3 top activities and I add detail. So it's still brainstorming, nothing's going to be perfect, but it kind of breaks down these big picture activities and it explore some of the complexity. So an example would be that if I want to put on an event as part of my work to increase local consumption of seafood, my sub activities then would be surveying the people that I want to be at the event in order to make sure that I do it at a time that they are interested in and have content that they are wanting to see in that event. I would then need to plan, organize, and facilitate the event. And then I would need to collect data either at the event or afterwards about the results and analyze that data in some way. So those are 3 sub activities that fall under that one activity of doing the event. So in this way, you're able to have really big picture and then start narrowing it down. This helps you out a lot with developing your ballpark budget numbers, because as you're fleshing out these details, you're thinking about who needs to be involved, what resources they need, how much time it's going to take. You still don't need the very specific details, but understanding, half of the money is going into this activity and half is going into this is helpful, because especially when you're working with partnerships, you really want to cement those big picture buckets first, because that will help then say, oh, well, we know that you have 30,000 in order to, do this survey and make a report and disseminate the information to a group of people. You have the autonomy to make the budget for that 30,000. And we know that that is something that you can do. You don't have to come and keep going back and forth about the specific activities at that point. And if you don't know some of the details about your ballpark budget numbers, asking is a great way to meet new partners, because the people who know the answers to that are potentially people that have the expertise you need in your project. If you aren't already aware of ballpark numbers for things, you potentially could have a stronger application by working with somebody who has more experience in that area. And so it's a great way to find new resources, meet new partners, and just make sure that you're telling a compelling story. So after that, I'll use the budget numbers to add or subtract other activities, make the timeline. It does depend somewhat on what specific grant opportunity you're looking for, but most do not favor if you apply for less than the full amount, as long as your expenses are justified. The problem that people come across is that they'll say, oh, we have an extra 20,000, so we're just gonna pay for, this staff person's full-time salary. And then in the narrative, it clearly isn't a full-time position. That's where people get into trouble. But if you have justified expenses, there's no reason not to use the full budget amount. And in most cases, I'll say, sometimes it can be a bit more strategic than that. But otherwise, it's good to understand your budget numbers to see how much you can maximize the amount of funding that you can get. You'll also be engaging with your partners at that point to understand the budget numbers, and the budget numbers will really form what activities you're able to do. So I've been parts of projects that we had like an idea of budget numbers, or we had an assumption, probably is a better word. And then a week before it was due, we find out that it actually costs twice as much as we thought it might. And then that means that we have to cut out other activities, which then in turn changed the narrative. And so after you do that once or twice, you vow never again to let that happen, because it just ends up being, a mad dash to the end. And I'm sure that, Tanya, based on your experience, that, it almost always seems like the week before a grant is due, just nobody sleeps. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that really also aids in figuring out your in-kind contributions. So when you understand your budget numbers, you start to see, and you start thinking about your activities. You say, well, this person is going to be spending a lot of time on the project, but we don't necessarily need them to receive money as part of the grant. And so how do we quantify their contributions as in kind? And even if grants don't require in-kind contribution, I know that these ones in particular do, but even if they don't, which many don't, having in-kind contributions can increase your competitiveness. It shows local buy-in, shows that you've really engaged with other people that are going to be recipients of the grant funding. And it can really increase the competitiveness of your application. So I would say, and even in this grant where there's a minimum 25%, I would say that going above that in any way is also likely to increase the competitive edge that you have, because it just shows more of that buy-in. So I would say that after that, you start really nailing down some of the details for the budget, at least the buckets. I think I mentioned this earlier. At least the categories let you then take your next step and start developing your specific activities. And then you can start working on your narrative from there. I think it's also very beneficial when you start out with a solid understanding of your budget, because then you're able to be more responsive to new opportunities. So I've been a part of projects where we had kind of like a project plan, but we didn't understand the budget numbers as strongly, and other partners came and wanted to participate, but we weren't able to respond quickly enough because we didn't understand what we would be giving up in order to include them in the opportunity. And so it ended up not being able to be included. But others that I've been a part of, when you have a really solid understanding of what your budget is and how much money is allocated to each activity, you're able to make quick decisions about what is the most important and what is the most impactful, and kind of be more adaptable down the road. It also sets very clear expectations with your partners, which is a necessity for things like your letters of support and commitment. Lots of organizations will require long lead out times, especially if you start working with academia or any kind of large institution like that, or governmental organizations. Oftentimes there's a lot of red tape with how they can provide letters of support. So you need a fully fleshed out scope of work. You need any contributions to be quantified. You need very specific details in a letter of support, and then that letter of support will take at least a week to be reviewed, if not longer. So if you're not figuring out those details until a week before the grant is due, you're not going to have a letter of support, which is incredibly harmful in many cases. So after you've built this work plan, you're using it to then form your narrative, to tell your story. I really love simple projects that are logistically simple, but create a large impact, right? So your narrative is never going to make up for a poor work plan. As a grant writer, I think I can hopefully say that I don't think I use highfalutin language. I don't think I'm a particularly grandiose, or that there's anything special about grant writers that they can find the magical words that really sell it. I think if there's a strong work plan, and the people who are reviewing it are able to understand what you want to do, and they can clearly see the link between what you're doing and the impact that you want, that's all they want. Most reviewers are going to be working from a checklist. And so even something as simple as copying, like using the template that's provided, is very important. But then if they don't have that, just copying, like if they say in the RFA that they want certain details, I'll oftentimes take those details and make them headings, because you just want to make it as easy as possible for the person who's reviewing it to check a box that says you included information about X, Y, or Z. And confusion usually is a big factor in poor scoring, because if somebody reads your narrative and they don't really understand what you're planning to do, or they don't understand how the claims that you're making, they just kind of mark it low and move on. You have to assume that these people are reviewing 10 of these a day, so if they're moving quickly through them, it's confusion that is really the killer. So I think work plan activities also should be leading directly into your impact. If the average person can't see the connection, you're working too hard in your writing of your narrative. You shouldn't be saying like we're doing this simple activity and it's going to like lead to this grandiose impact. If that's not a connection that the average person could make and understand, oh yeah, they're doing that and it leads to that, you're putting too much responsibility on yourself to write this narrative. I think that's why starting out with your work plan activities, if maybe those need to be adjusted to be more specific or to be more artfully selected so that it's very clear that the activities lead to the impact. The impact should be backed up by either some kind of research or experience, and say that we think that this will come about as a result of our activities. You need to be able to point to either your own experience and say, because we've done it before and it has, or because this, scientist said so, or because another person has done it and they had these similar results. Otherwise, you're just making assertions that aren't always backed up. And there's obviously innovative projects will need to do more of that. But I think with things that are innovative, it's even more important to have research and experience and to show your thought process about, these things are what leads me to think that this is going to be successful, even though it's innovative. And that can be a tricky one. That's where more, I think, the narrative can really play a big part if it's innovative. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to get grant funds without being particularly innovative. So why reinvent the wheel? And then if actions don't tie into your impact, it's a really clear sign that you should just cut them out. And that's another thing that a lot of people run into, that, like I was saying before, where they pay for the full salary of a staff person. A lot of people will just have activities because it's kind of like their standard practice, but they don't contribute to the actual end goals of the grant. And so starting with a work plan gives you an opportunity to say, does this lead directly into the impact and the objectives that we're looking to accomplish? If not, there should be an opportunity to just cut them out immediately. I'm sorry, I've just noticed that there were some chats, but I'll not look at that until the end. So next, you really want to show how the project is a natural progression. I think that listening to some of the conversation that we were having with Jeremy right before this was really relevant, because you want to show how a project is a natural progression of what you're already doing. It can be innovative, but it shouldn't be completely out of left field in most cases. A lot of donors are wary of inexperienced project teams, and they want to see the project live beyond the grant period. So showing them that the work is consistent with the work that your organization already does, or that it is consistent with something a partner does, or there's some kind of experience that's already there that will help this project live on beyond the grant period, is super important. And then also it allows you to draw out a lot of things that you can contribute because you already are doing these activities. So you have a network, you have business resources, you can provide education to other people. There's a lot of things that if you show how it's a progression of what you're doing, you're really leveraging your experience. I'm a firm believer that you can't have too many partnerships, and that the grants are a year-round activity. So the idea, I really liked what I heard Tanya, you saying when I first got on about, even if it's not something that you're looking at this year, starting those conversations now, understanding what your partners want and how you could work together, and keep it a continuous conversation. It shouldn't be the grant's due in a month. We're only now starting to talk about this. I really am a firm believer that if you have a plan, even without grant funding, I've seen people start to move forward on things. And as somebody who works in the private industry, I am interested, I work with like nonprofits in my local city in order to move forward on projects, because I'm just excited about the impact. I get sold on the idea of what we're going to accomplish. And so then I'm more willing to just volunteer my time rather than needing to have grant funding in order to do something. So getting lots of organizations involved, making these plans before you necessarily are applying for a grant is always a good thing. I usually prefer getting a mix of private individuals, both non and for-profit companies. If you can get academia involved or support from the government, those are super impactful. Just showing the diversity. I think anytime you're siloed, and the smaller the group is, the harder it is to tell a really compelling story. And I think people like academia are really good at telling the story about how your project will live on. You know, they're going to help you develop those educational resources, disseminate, and any grant maker wants to see the impact of their money go further. And so any way that you can tell the story about how it lives on beyond the project is going to be really impactful. It also shows that your idea is supported locally. It impacts lots of different people, a diversity of people. And it also can show that you have the engagement of your target market. So especially now in modern grants, there's a hard push for the idea of showing the engagement in any kind of target market. So if you are wanting to serve an underserved demographic through your project, somebody in a low income area, your application is 10 times more competitive if you can show that you have talked with those people before your application. If they've helped you develop your application, develop the ideas, make a plan, you're 10 times more competitive, because it's not like a top-down approach of, I just think these people need this thing and so I'm doing it. It's, we've come up with a plan together and I'm helping to facilitate this work. And so along that line, having third party, ideally, monitoring and evaluation that is ongoing. So you want to show that you've engaged with people before the project and in the design, but then you also want to show that you are continuously evaluating the project and kind of like adapting it as it goes on. So if you can have a third party review of your work, that's, I think, the ideal. Very difficult to do in many cases because there might not be local expertise. I think nonprofits play a really important role in this kind of thing. Oftentimes, if you can get a nonprofit that has experience in the area just to kind of be an advisor, do some evaluation, and just provide another perspective. That I think is usually very impactful. And then they can help you share those results with a larger audience. So I think I've touched on it earlier, but you really want to be thinking long term. I think a simple plan you want to do simple things now to create an impact long term. I think a lot of people try to make really complex projects that do a lot of things and maybe try to have a really large short-term impact, but that ends up leading to confusion. And so with a lot of the people I work with, we focus more on the idea of simple plans that are easy to understand and show a lot of potential for long-term impact, really doing foundational things. So obviously you want to be more strategic when you're looking at a particular application and what you're doing, who you're doing it with. But I would say that the industry by and large can end up skewing towards getting too complex and not being able to convey everything that they want to do in a 15-page application. So you want to show how you're having very concrete, small impacts today, but through engaging with people who can further the education or engaging with other local partners and networks, this impact is going to be leveraged into building more and more projects, more and more impact, and you're showing how this is just the next step. You don't need to accomplish the long-term goal. You just need to show how for this situation, the next step to accomplish that long-term goal is this. And we want to do that one step. I think a lot of grants want to see capacity building as a primary outcome, even if they don't state it. And that's just the nature of grant makers. So I think that is something that a lot of people miss out on, really emphasizing the idea that maybe there's a difference between putting a lot of funding and activities specifically towards building capacity and showing how your capacity is built through grant activities. And maybe that's a hard distinction, but the idea being that maybe you don't, hire somebody to come in and train your staff, because that's a very concrete form of capacity building. But you can say that we're putting on this activity, and because we've now put on that activity, we will have the resources, the know-how, and the community engagement to do a similar community next year. And so you can demonstrate how your capacity is being built, even though that's not the specific objective of your activities. And showing how the sustainability long term. There are three generally when most people talk about sustainability. There's economic. So how is this work going to fund itself in the future? How does it, are you going to continue to pay for it? Is there a way that you can draw some kind of income? Can the project help you establish a way to draw income to support whatever you're building? So something like if you're building a network or a market, an idea would be then that, is there a way that you can have some kind of income generating activity that's a part of that market that then supports it in perpetuity, rather than saying as soon as the grant is done, we either need more money or it's gone. Environmental, does it harm or hurt the environment if it continued long term? Social, is there social support for this project? Do people want it? Is this a long-term plan? For the LAMP specific tips, they seem to be primarily focused on producers. So big priorities are just how to increase cooperation between different types of groups in your local area. So how to increase cooperation between groups of producers and restaurants, or how to increase cooperation between your local educational institutions and producers, or nonprofits and the local educational institutions. Just how can you get different groups of people involved together? I think the LAMP grants in particular are more business focused than the vast majority. And so it's really nice, because if you can just think about how to approach it like a business. How do you improve your profitability? How do you improve your products, either the quality or the variety? How do you make logistics more efficient? How can you improve the technical operations, or just anything that a business person would want? Anything that comes down to money is something that would fit really well within the parameters of this grant. So innovation, like I mentioned earlier, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think something that I've seen a lot of success with is people doing research and finding out, this is kind of like the outcome that we want. What are the things that other cities have done to accomplish this? And so then you have a case study that you can use in your application. You can say, we want to increase cooperation between fishermen and local restaurants. So then you can look at other cities that have really good cooperation between fishermen and restaurants, or that have done previous grants. The USDA loves to see, one of their big things is that the idea of your grant will teach people in the future. So if you can point to a previous USDA grant and say, hey, we're building off of this, you've already funded it, and it's going to be beneficial for us, it's something that's really compelling for them. And planning grants can be a great way of just bringing in somebody professional who can help you actually come up with that plan, either doing research, interviewing local stakeholders, just providing those gaps that you identified earlier. You can bring in somebody who can help you actually test out the idea and come up with a plan for implementation. And I think one of the most important things that most people do not get a grant the first time they apply. It is a process. And the first time you have the conversations with your partners, you're not going to have everything fleshed out, but those conversations are important to have. Over time, you'll get better at telling your story, and you'll be able to be more successful, but don't be discouraged. I think it was specifically mentioned earlier that when you start getting grants, it does get easier over time to get more. First grant's usually the hardest. You don't have great financial records. You don't have content or data developed. You don't know grant language, you don't know who to work with in your area. After you do it the first time though, you are able to reuse a lot of your content. So you understand budget numbers for a lot of core activities that you might want to do. You have partnerships developed. It's a lot easier to pick up an idea that you've talked about before and kind of adapt it than it is to do something for the first time. And then you understand who's able to help you go through that process. You know, like who at your local USDA office is good to talk to, rather than just emailing random people on a page. There also are lots of other grants that you're able to be competitive for. Grants developing businesses, environmental stewardship, mentoring others in the industry, helping community members and engagement. Right now, there's a large emphasis on local food systems, connecting food directly to institutions, improving nutrition, and then climate smart practices are big, at least within agriculture. I imagine it's going to be the same within seafood. And so these are like real big things that they're looking at right now. There are lots of other ones you can get from USDA, NRCS. There are state agency specific grants that do industry or economic development. You can get them from your city or your county government. And then there are also like national and local private organizations, at least for nonprofits, but also ones like the Veterans Coalition that they support farmers. I'm not actually entirely sure if they support veteran fishermen, but idea being that there are these private donors that you likely have never heard of that can provide at least small amounts of funding for specific types of activities. It is hard for the average person. And so I actually help a lot of people do that kind of thing. I have a list of funding opportunities. I also am developing kind of like, you know, newsletter outreach type things whenever new funding opportunities open up. So I do work with a lot of farmers, but I'm excitedly broadening my perspective right now, working within the seafood industry as well. And so it's free for anybody who wants it. You're able to get it on my website or feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share it. And you know, make announcements about future funding that also becomes available. No obligation of any kind. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm happy to provide it. I think it's an important note to make too, that even if activities that you're trying to accomplish aren't covered by a specific grant opportunity, I view grants as very money in, money out type of system, where if you are going to be using money to implement an activity and you can get a grant to offset that, you then have the money you would have spent that you can use anywhere you want. So even if you're wanting to build a building, and a lot of grants don't allow you to build a building, if you're able to get a grant that helps you implement a program instead, that means that you don't have to spend that money on the program and you can use that money towards the building. So my organization, Stewards Unlimited, we help ag organizations get funding. We've seen a lot of success, particularly from the USDA. And usually we focus around identifying and evaluating new funding opportunities, helping people design competitive proposals, and then actually doing the proposal development and helping them win funding. So even if that's not something that a particular client needs, I really enjoy helping people connect with the people that they need to connect with. And that has kind of been like the one-stop shop resource for a lot of my ag clients. And I'm happy to do something similar for anybody if you just need kind of like if you're looking for a resource and you don't know where to get it. I'm happy to at least see if I can. And that's actually how I found the local catch network was through that process. And I've been very happy with, you know, the connection. So just some simple steps. I think it's very impressive that you guys are here today. I just want to say that seeking new information is very hard. You guys are obviously, you have some kind of impact that you want. You're going on the way. So just keep that up and you're going to be successful regardless. I would also encourage you to look at my website, reach out to me directly. We can have a conversation about your goals. And then that's kind of the long-term goals that I enjoy helping people focus on their work. And then I can help take responsibility for their growth. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, or smart remarks. This is my contact information. So I'm happy to have a chat with anybody and continue the conversation, but I think we're also going to have a Q&A potentially, so we can keep it pretty broad. Happy to chat and see where it goes.
Thanks, Stephen. We're actually at time currently.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't. No, you would no. All of the information you shared was amazing, and people wanted to stay on. There were a couple people that had to hop off, so we have a handful of folks still on. And if everybody wants to stay on, if they have questions for Stephen, maybe we can give like 5 to 10 minutes or so, and then maybe we can do some follow-up following the session. So, Stephen, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. This information was incredible. Like, even if you've heard it before, I think you just did a really good job laying it out there and simplifying it. But I'm going to pause, and please feel free to unmute yourselves if you guys have questions for Stephen. You must have covered it all.
I guess
Stephen, this is Sarah. I do have a question for you. It definitely resonated with me when you were saying, maximizing community over profit, but then also looking at the profit focus of like the LAMP programs. In my reading of it, I was kind of torn between going towards that community benefit or going towards X amount of dollars will be increased. Like, what are your thoughts on that for the LAMP grants?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that I would first attempt to do both in the sense of, right? I think there's a really compelling narrative to talk about maximizing income in dollars for not the right people, but for people that aren't normally the recipients of that, right? So there, particularly for the LAMP grants, there's a lot of focus on producers. Producers generally are not flush with cash. I've never met a farmer or a fisherman that just has too much money. So I think there's usually a compelling story to talk about. We're going to help these people increase their profitability, and through doing that, it's being invested locally, and that's what helps the community grow. I think the really local focus of these grants is beneficial for that reason, because it's easy to fall back and just say that any financial gain is actually also an investment in the community, because they're a local producer, they source things locally, we have local partnerships. And so you can really show how you're able to do both at the same time. But if you have a more like specific example of how that dynamic plays out in your project right now, I'm happy to also speak to that.
Okay, super. You're so awesome today. I really appreciate everything you've brought to us.
Sarah, were you the one that's located in Hawaii?
I'm not, but no. I was raised in Hawaii,
oh, really?
But I am in Alaska now. So are you in Hawaii? I see the surfboard.
Yeah, well, I'm not currently. Right now I am visiting my sister in Florida, but I did live in Hawaii for 4 years. And so I was wanting to make that connection. But man, Hawaii and then Alaska, that's just both very interesting places.
We'll have to chat.
Yeah.
Sarah, I don't know if this is helpful, but the Regional Food System Partnership Grant that we're developing is very much starting from some really active community groups and the work that they're doing in their own communities. So farm to institution work, so that's my area, is a lot of it comes from institution down, and everybody's focused on the institution. What are they willing to buy? How can we sell to them? What's it going to take to get to them? Like, it's all about like what the institution is thinking about doing, willing to do. And what we want to do is we want to actually sort of shift that and create kind of a new approach to farm to institution that is addressing more of the community need. And so it kind of gets into what you're talking about. We have a similar sort of thing, which is like, how are we talking about this? How are we showing that connection and the benefit to the producers from both the farm to institution activities, but also that community-based approach. And what we posit is that there's going to be better benefits to producers when people who actually know them and know what they're dealing with and know what the eaters in the system need, can articulate that in a way that we can then push up into the institutions to be able to provide institutions with what they don't know they need, but that they do. And so our organization, who's so focused on the institution, is kind of helping with some of that bridging. So I don't know if that's useful at all, but it's kind of, I just feel like it was worth talking about because it's sort of we're in a similar approach of trying to balance that, the community benefits versus the profits. We don't have the data to show the profits, but we do have data that shows that the relationships between like through that supply chain are absolutely critical. People who know how to address the barriers that keep cropping up are the only thing that makes it successful over the long term. We do have data to show that. So that's sort of the basis of our theory of change here, if that's helpful. But some of what you said too, Stephen, you've given me a lot of food for thought of things that we can do to make our whole articulation of all this stronger. So I appreciate that, and we'll go with that.
Yeah, I saw your note. It sounds like you guys are doing some pretty interesting things. And I caught on the tail end when I first hopped on around, it sounds like you've been preparing these grants for a while. So you've got a good amount of experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of different things. So we have some state grants that we have had some USDA success. A lot of times we've been part of others, like people have roped us into things because of our connectivity role. We went for a regional food system partnership grant last time in 2021, and we didn't get it. And we were actually dinged for too many partners. However, I think it was because we didn't do a good enough job like articulating the kind of rings of engagement, because there were so many people and groups that would benefit from the kind of work we were doing, and we were trying to show like how it would benefit all these different groups, but it didn't connect enough, like you said, into the activities and outcomes obviously enough. So I think that that's where we could have done a better job with that. So we learn every time.
Yeah, I saw that. Are you just in the Northeast? So you wouldn't I'm trying to build a lot with work in my local Chattanooga, Tennessee area. So any recommendations that people have for like Chattanooga, Tennessee, or that area? I'd love to make some connections for the people here.
God, that's that's kind of a really hard one. But there's the University of Kentucky is doing a lot of farm to institution work, and they have some really great point people there that might be better able to connect you with some others in that region. That would be where I would start. And I'm happy to get a name and an email or an introduction there, and then you can see if that helps at all.
Oh yeah, that'd be wonderful. Here, I'm copying your email, and I'll follow up, so it's not on you to to remember to do this and then do it.
There's a mid-Atlantic group, but they're not, I don't think they reach all the way down to Tennessee. There's like some people doing stuff in the deep South. There's some people doing stuff like in a couple states, like South Carolina has some activity, Virginia has some activity, but I don't.
Yeah, there's not too much going on. That's why I'm also interested in finding, there isn't a whole lot of work in this area, but it's like there are a couple key people that are passionate about it. And so that's why it's like, all right, let's find those resources you need to actually like really start moving on it. So
is there a university with an extension program? Because they're also often some of the first to get involved and supportive of farm to institution type activities.
That's a good idea. Yeah, there is something at least in Knoxville nearby, but I'll give it some thought, and I'll reach out to you and see if I'll get that name or the just a repeat of the information you just gave.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Well, everyone, I hate to close it out. We had a small but mighty group of people with us today. Want to just, thank you guys for being here. And I always feel like the conversation is so good, and everyone brings like different pieces of knowledge and I'm just always amazed by like how giving people are with their time and the information that they have available to them. So I want to say thank you guys. Stephen, you were amazing. Jeremy, same to you. Following this, just so you all know, we'll send out like Stephen's contact information, the email that Jeremy had put in the chat, and then a recording link. And Stephen, can we send out the PowerPoint? We had somebody ask if
Yeah,
we could
definitely.
send out to people. Okay, cool. Well, thanks guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and we will see you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, thanks.
Bye.